Warning: the following story contains descriptions of graphic violence. Viewer discretion is advised. Christmas is usually a time of good cheer, good food, and good time spent with family. Christmas 1959 was supposed to follow this tradition. However, for one Florida family, the Christmas season had become a nightmare. The Walker family of Osprey, Florida, included Father Cliff, 25, Mother Christine, 24, a son named Jimmy, 3 years old, and a daughter named Debbie, 2 years old. On December 19th, 1959, the entire Walker family was out running errands. The first to return to their modest ranch-style house was Christine. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary to the housewife. She even managed to put away her groceries before she was attacked. Authorities believe that 24-year-old Christine Walker arrived at the family's farm home around 4 p.m. on Sunday, December 19th, 1959, where she was essayed, then murdered by gunshot. Her husband Cliff, 25, then arrived with their 3-year-old son Jimmy and 1-year-old daughter Debbie. Cliff was ambushed and killed by gunshot. Jimmy and Debbie were then murdered. Jimmy was shot, and Debbie was shot in addition to being drowned in the bathtub. The actual cause of death is unknown, and she could have been shot in the bathtub. News stories noted that there were gifts around the Christmas tree. The bodies were not found until the following day. Daniel McLeod, a ranch worker at the Palmer Beach where Cliff Walker worked, went to the Walker home in order to grab Cliff for a planned pig hunting excursion. Daniel immediately informed the police of his gruesome discovery. A subsequent search of the Walker home found that several items were missing: Cliff's pocket knife, Cliff and Christine's marriage license, and a high school majorette uniform that Christine had once worn. Given the personal nature of these stolen items, investigators theorized that the killer or killers had known the Walkers, and given that Christine had been raped, it was likely that she was the main target. Police investigated both McLeod and Elbert Walker, Cliff's cousin who was known to be a hothead, but decided that both men were innocent. In a popular theory, it has ex-cons Perry Smith and Dick Hickok, the main villains in Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, actually carried out the murders. Besides similarities between the Walker family murders and the murder of the Clutter family of Kansas, it is also known that both Smith and Hickok were in Miami Beach at the time of the murders. Furthermore, Florida police had learned throughout their investigation that the Walkers were interested in purchasing a Chevy Bel Air prior to the massacre. It just so happened that Smith and Hickok had driven to Florida in a stolen Bel Air. Police never identified a motive, and 587 people were suspects at one time or another. This case remains open. Between the evening of June 9th, 1912, to the early morning of June 10th, 1912, in the town of Villisca in Iowa, United States, 6 family members and 2 guests were found bludgeoned in the Moore residence. All 8 victims, including 6 children, had severe head wounds from an axe. The Moore family consisted of parents Josiah B., Sarah, and their 4 children, Herman, Mary, Arthur, and Paul Vernon. An affluent family, the Moores were well known and well liked in their community. On June 9th, 1912, Mary Catherine Moore invited Anna Mae and Lena Gertrude Stillinger to spend the night at the Moore residence. That evening, visiting girls and the Moore family attended the Presbyterian church where they participated in the Children's Day program, which Sarah had coordinated. After the program ended at 9:30 p.m., the Moores and the Stillinger sisters walked to the Moores' house, arriving between 9:45 and 10 p.m. At 7 a.m. the next day, June 10th, Mary Peckham, the Moores' neighbor, became concerned after she noticed the family had not come out to do their morning chores. Peckham knocked on the Moores' door. When nobody answered, she tried to open the door and discovered that it was locked. Peckham led the Moores' chickens out and called Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. Like Peckham, Moore received no response when he knocked on the door and shouted. Ross unlocked the front door with his copy of the house key. While Peckham stood on the porch, Ross went into the parlor and opened the guest bedroom door, where he found Anna and Lena Stillinger's bodies on the bed. Moore immediately told Peckham to call Henry Hank Horton, Villisca's primary peace officer, who arrived shortly thereafter. Horton's search of the house revealed that the entire Moore family and the two Stillinger girls had been bludgeoned to death. The murder weapon, an axe belonging to Josiah, was found in the guest room where Stillinger's sisters were found. Doctors concluded that the murders had taken place between midnight and 5 a.m. 2 spent cigarettes in the attic suggested that the killer or killers patiently waited in the attic until the Moore family and the Stillinger guests were asleep. The killer or killers began in the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping. Josiah received more blows from the axe than any other victim. His face had been cut into such an extent that his eyes were missing. The ceiling in his room also had a gouge mark from where the murderer lifted the axe to murder him. The killer or killers used the blade of the axe on Sarah, while using the blunt end on the rest of the victims. Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur, and Paul were next bludgeoned in the head with the same manner as their parents. Afterwards, the murderer returned to the master bedroom to inflict more blows on the elder Moores, knocking over a shoe that had filled with blood, before moving downstairs to the guest bedroom and killing Ina and Lena. Seemingly afterwards, a 4-pound slab of bacon was taken out of the ice box and laid next to the axe. Investigators also found untouched food and bloody water during the search. After the search, people were let in to see if they could have committed the crime, completely contaminating the weapon. Investigators believed that all of the victims, except for Lena Stillinger, had been asleep when murdered. They thought that she was awake and tried to fight back, as she was found lying crosswise on the bed, with a defensive wound on her arm. Lena's nightgown was pushed up to her waist and she was wearing no undergarments, leading to law enforcement speculation the killers had sexually molested her or attempted to do so. This was later proven false. Over time, many possible suspects emerged, including Reverend George Kelly, Frank F. Jones, William Mansfield, Loving Mitchell, Paul Mueller, and Henry Lee Moore. Kelly was tried twice for the murder. The first trial ended in a hung jury, while the second ended in acquittal. Other suspects in the investigation were also exonerated. The case of the Villisca murders still remains open and unsolved. Number 3. The Keddie murders. The Keddie murders are an unsolved quadruple homicide that occurred over the night of April 11th through 12th in 1981 in Keddie, California, United States. In July 1979, Glenna Sue Sharp, along with 5 children, left her home in Connecticut after separating from her husband James Sharp. They were relocated to Northern California, where Sue's brother Don lived. Upon arriving in California, she rented a small trailer formerly occupied by her brother at the Claremont Trailer Village in Quincy. The following fall, she moved to house number 28 in the rural Sierra Nevada Railroad town of Keddie. The house was much smaller than the trailer and had become available when the Plymouth County Sheriff Sylvester Douglas Thomas vacated the property. She resided there with her 15-year-old son John, 14-year-old daughter Sheila, and 12-year-old daughter Tina, and 2 young sons, Rick and Greg. On April 11, 1981, at around 11:30 a.m., Sue, Sheila, and Greg drove from the residence of their friends, the Meeks family, to retrieve Rick, who was attending baseball tryouts at Gainser Field in Quincy. They happened upon John and his friend Dana Hall Wingate hitchhiking at the mouth of the canyon from Quincy to Keddie, then drove them about 6 miles away to Keddie. 2 hours later, at around 3:30 p.m., John and Dana hitchhiked back to Quincy, where they may have had plans to visit friends. Around this time, the boys were seen in the city's downtown area. That same evening, Sheila had plans to spend the night with the Seabolt family, who lived adjacent to number 27, while Sue remained at home with Rick, Greg, and the boys' young friend John Smart. Sheila departed house number 28 shortly after 8 p.m. to sleep at the Seabolts. Tina, who had been watching television at the Seabolt residence, returned to 28 after asking what time it was at 9:30. At approximately 8 a.m. on the morning of April 12th, Sheila returned to number 28 and discovered the dead bodies of Sue, John, and Dana in the house's living room. All 3 had been bound with medical tape and electrical cords. Tina was absent from the home, while the 3 younger children, Rick, Greg, and Justin, were found physically unharmed in an adjacent bedroom. Initial reports stated that the 3 young boys had slept through the incident, although this was later contradicted. Upon discovering the scene, Sheila rushed back to the Seabolt's house, and Jamie Seabolt retrieved Rick, Greg, and Justin through the bedroom window. He later admitted to having briefly entered the home through the back door to see if anyone was still alive, potentially contaminating evidence in the process. The murders of Sue, John, and Dana were especially vicious. 2 bloody knives and 1 hammer were found at the scene, and one of the knives, a steak knife, later determined to have been used in the murders, had been bent at roughly 30 degrees. Blood spatter evidence from inside the house indicated that the murders had all taken place in the living room. Sue was discovered laying on her side near the living room sofa, nude from the waist down, and gagged with a blue bandana and her own underwear, which had been secured with tape. She had been stabbed in the chest, and her throat was stabbed horizontally, the wound passing through her larynx and nicking her spine, and on the side of her head was an imprint matching the butt of a Daisy 880 Powerline BB pellet rifle. John's throat was slashed. Dana had multiple head injuries and had been manually strangled to death. John and Dana suffered blunt force trauma to their heads caused by 1 or more hammers. Autopsies determined that Sue and John died from the knife wounds and blunt force trauma, and Dana died from asphyxiation. Sheila and the Seabolt family heard no commotion during the night. A couple living in the nearby House 16 was awakened at 1:15 a.m. by what sounded like muffled screaming. Tina's jacket, shoes, and toolbox containing various tools were missing from the house, which showed no indication of forced entry. The house's telephone had been taken off the hook, and the cord cut from the outlet, and the drapes were closed. Martin Smart, a neighbor and main suspect, claimed that a claw hammer had inexplicably gone missing from his home. Plymouth County Sheriff Sylvester Thomas, who presided over the case, later stated that Martin had provided endless clues in the case that seemed to throw the suspicion away from him. In addition to interviewing the Smarts, detectives interviewed numerous other locals and neighbors. Several, including members of the Seabolt family, recalled seeing a green van parked at the Sharps' house around 9 p.m. Justin offered conflicting stories of the evening and stated that he had dreamed details of the murders, although he later claimed to have actually witnessed them. In his later account of the events, told under hypnosis, he claimed to have awoken to sounds coming from the living room while asleep in the bedroom with Rick and Greg. Investigating these sounds, he saw Sue with 2 men, one with a mustache and short hair, the other clean-shaven with long hair. Both wore glasses. According to Justin, John and Dana then entered the home and began heatedly arguing with the men. A fight ensued, after which Tina entered the room and was taken out of the cabin's back door by one of the men. Based on Justin's descriptions, composite sketches of the 2 unknown men were produced by Harlan Embry, a man with no artistic ability and no training in forensic sketching. It was never explained why, with access to the Justice Department's and the Federal Bureau of Investigation's top forensic artist, law enforcement chose to use an amateur who sometimes volunteered to help local police. In press releases accompanying the sketches, the suspects were described as in their late 20s to early 30s. One stood between 5'11" and 6'2" tall with dark blonde hair, and the other between 5'6" and 5'10" tall with black greased hair. Both wore gold-framed sunglasses. Rumors regarding the crimes being ritualistic or motivated by drug trafficking were dismissed by Plymouth County Sheriff Doug Thomas, who stated in the week following the murders that neither drug paraphernalia nor illegal drugs were found in the home. About 4,000 man-hours were spent working the case, which Thomas described as frustrating. Tina's disappearance was initially investigated by the FBI as a possible abduction, although it was reported on April 29, 1981, that the FBI had backed off the search as California State Department of Justice was doing an adequate job and made the FBI's presence unnecessary. A grid pattern search of the area covering a 5-mile radius around the house was conducted with police canines, but the efforts were fruitless. On April 22, 1984, a bottle collector discovered the cranium portion of a human skull and part of a mandible at camp near Feather Falls in neighboring Butte County, roughly 100 miles from Keddie. The remains were confirmed by forensic pathologists to be those of Tina in June 1984. Near the remains, detectives also discovered a blue nylon jacket, a blanket, a pair of Levi Strauss jeans with a missing back pocket, and an empty medical tape dispenser. Shortly after announcing the discovery, the Butte County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous call that identified the remains as belonging to Tina, but the call was not documented. A tape containing a recording of the call was found at the bottom of an evidence box at some point after 2013 by a deputy who was assigned to the case. The house in which the murders occurred was demolished in 2004. In a 2008 documentary on the murders, Marilyn Smart claimed that she suspected her husband Martin and his friend John Bo Boubaid were responsible for the murders. Marilyn claimed that on the evening of April 11, 1981, she had left Martin and Boubaid at a local bar around 11 p.m. and returned home to sleep. She stated that she had awoken at approximately 2 a.m. on April 12th to find the two men burning an unknown item in the wood stove. Additionally, she alleged that Martin hated Johnny Sharp with a passion. However, in 2008 documentary, Sheriff Doug Thomas said that he had interviewed Martin, who passed a polygraph examination. According to a 2016 article published by the Sacramento Bee, Martin had left Keddie and driven to Reno, Nevada, shortly after the murders. While there, he sent a letter to Marilyn, ruminating on personal struggles in their marriage, which he concluded by stating, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives," unquote. In a 2016 interview, Gamberg stated that the letter was overlooked in the initial investigation and was never admitted as evidence. He later criticized the quality of the initial investigation, saying, quote, "You could take someone just coming out of the academy and they'd have done a better job," unquote. A counselor whom Martin regularly visited also alleged that he had admitted to the murders of Sue and Tina, but claimed, quote, "I didn't have anything to do with the boys," unquote. He allegedly told the counselor that Tina was killed to prevent her from identifying him, as she had witnessed the whole thing. Martin died of cancer in Portland, Oregon on June 2000, and Boubaid, who allegedly had ties to organized crime in Chicago, died there in 1988 on March 24, 2016. A hammer matching the description of the one Martin had claimed to have lost was discovered in a local pond and taken into evidence by Plymouth County Special Investigator Mike Gamberg. Plymouth County Sheriff Hagwood, who was 16 years old at the time of the murders, knew the Sharp family, stated that the location it was found, it would have been intentionally put there. It would not have been accidentally misplaced, unquote. Gamberg also stated that at that time, 6 potential suspects were being examined. In April 2018, Gamberg stated that DNA evidence recovered from a piece of tape at the crime scene matched that of a known living suspect. For more content, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you.